There are so many places and so many people to dive with. Find the one that you feel happy, at peace, and enjoy yourself. Don't try to impress the big cave guy who has been fighting sharks in caves with a knife, blindfolded.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. Every interview is a chance for me to learn and engage in fun conversations. For those that have been following the podcast, many of you know I have been seeking advice and gaining knowledge on rebreathers. Speaking to Martin Splitt of Switzerland was no exception. Becoming certified in the Seychelles before continuing his path closer to home, it was great to hear his insights and thoughts about his journey, the benefits of learning from multiple instructors, going from open circuit to closed, why he gravitated towards the Divesoft Liberty, and my reasons for choosing the Fathom Gemini. Please enjoy. Martin, how are you doing this morning? It's this morning for you, correct?
It's morning, yes. I don't know what time it is for you. It's probably afternoon?
Yeah, almost into the evening. It's a little past 5 right now, so 5 p.m.
That's a good time. Yeah, so for me, it's 10 a.m. That's both reasonable times, I would say.
Are you a morning person, evening person, hate the mornings?
Oh, I'm so ambivalent about that. So technically, if I get the choice, I'm absolutely not a morning person, but having a cat that does think she is the center of the universe and she gets hungry around 7, I'm a morning person. Yeah, no. Became a morning person accidentally.
Yes, our as soon as the sun is up, our cat lets us know that it's time to eat. So
Oh, that's nice. That's nice because ours doesn't wait for the sun. Like, she is her own goddess. So no, she sets the pace of the universe. Clearly.
What is her name?
Mika.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So funny story about our cat is we have a cat. We had it in the United States. We actually brought it over to Malaysia. And it's a pretty penny that costs, but you know, things you do for love. And we could never figure out or settle on a name. We went through so many different names to the point where now we just call her Little Cat, and she's not so little anymore.
Oh, it's cute though.
Yeah, so Elsie for short, and Little Cat is her official name. So
Elsie is cute. That's nice.
But so my first, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm excited to chat with you.
Me.
And my first question I want to ask you is, tell me about that first breath underwater. Tell me about what led to it, the what, the why, the how. Did you hate it? Did you love it? Tell me all about it.
So I always loved the underwater world. I was swimming, snorkeling whenever I had the opportunity. Not coming from a very, very rich background, I actually did never think I would have the opportunity to go diving. There was like a documentary on German television at some point in the 90s, and I was like mind blown. This underwater world is beautiful. 20 or so years later, I was fortunate enough to actually go on vacation to the Maldives. Lots of snorkeling there, and obviously the wish to kind of explore further, go a little further down, and the house reef eventually dropped off into the blue, and I'm like, wow, I want to go there, I want to explore this. And as part of the package deal that we had, it was said to be like a Discover Scuba experience, but it was basically just you would go in with a dive master, they would walk you in through or across the beach into, like, I don't know, let's say like waist deep water, and then you just lay down with scuba gear on your back, and we just laid there in the sand. And I had my first breath, and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Looking back at it, no, it was very boring. Like, I saw sand. Okay, I saw sand in the face of the dive master next to me going like, you okay? That was my first breath. But I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. I have to do this. Unfortunately, because I was kind of nervous about it, and it's this lifelong dream kind of thing, I was like, oh, what if I hate it? What if I can't do it? What if it doesn't work for me? So I postponed it as long as I could. And then when I actually did this, it was like a day before we flew back. So no time, no opportunity to do the open water course right away. So it took another year for me to actually then take my course and actually become a diver.
Oh, okay, okay. And in the Maldives, well, that's funny that you say that, because it's like looking back on our, most people's first breath underwater. It's like you it's so amazing, but then when you look back on it, you're like, was it really though? I mean, that first breath is obviously amazing, but like, I mean, because I've known
Yeah,
people that did a discover scuba dive in a pool, and they're like, holy cow, this is the most amazing thing, and you're just kind of sitting there like, yeah, this is awesome. But I guess
I
the
know.
joy of that person makes it worthwhile. But so where did you end up becoming certified?
I became certified in the Seychelles.
Oh, okay, okay, just
Hmm.
another trip.
Yep. Yep. Just another trip. Because I don't know why. In hindsight, so stupid. I live in Switzerland. We have tons of lakes and rivers. And yet I was like, where do I have to go to dive? I don't know, man. It never occurred to me. I was like, I wanna know what's below the surface. And like, dot dot dot. So how about diving? Huh? No, did not. No, that didn't click with me. No, it just didn't occur. Didn't connect the dots at all.
That's funny, man. That's hilarious. Well, I mean, to be fair, I was kind of in the same boat. So I did my first diving in Thailand, backpacking through, just, typical tourist. Like, yeah, let's do
Nice.
this. Did a discover scuba dive. And it wasn't, I think, until like maybe a year later, 2 years later, where I was sitting in a bar after work one day, just having a beer, most people, typical thing to do. And I was just talking to this random stranger, and I was telling him about this experience because, I like to chat. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, man, I tried this diving. I think it was awesome. He's like, there's diving here, right? And I was like, what? And it makes sense. There's a
Nice.
big lake there, and kind of like you're saying, it's like, well, why wouldn't there be? And come to find out, through the years, that there's actually a very thriving dive scene in the Central Texas area. But so when you went to the Seychelles to become
Mm-hmm.
certified, and then how was the progression through there? Like, when did you start diving around your home area?
So, and this probably ties back into my original motivation for this entire thing. Like, I really, really wanted to know what's below the surface of all the bodies of water that I've been near. Coming from northern Germany, I have been pretty much going to the so-called ocean, to the German coast, northern German coast, pretty much every year since I was like 4 years old or something. And I always wanted to see what's below. And you can do that with snorkeling to a degree, but I was always drawn in. So I did my training in the Seychelles, and then I realized, wait, there are dive shops in Zurich. So you could probably, all these lakes and rivers that I'm swimming in and I'm going to every day, and I'm passing on my way to work, I can probably dive here as well. What would that take? And I went into the shop, chatted with the people there, and they're like, yeah, in Switzerland, it's pretty much all year round. It's cold below, I don't know, like 10, 15, 20 meters. So you do definitely want to have a dry suit. And I was like, oh, all right, okay, yeah. And that was in the back of my mind for a while, because dry suits are not the cheapest piece of equipment. And I had a whopping 9 dives at this point. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this diving thing really is like just a phase, or if this is like the next big thing in my life. So I'm not ready to shell out for a dry suit just yet. And then we visited my in-laws, who also live near lakes in Germany. And that dive shop actually offers something that ours here in Zurich didn't, and that is a tri dive in a dry suit.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And I love my in laws, but there is only so much you can do there. And we were staying for over a week. I think we were staying 2 weeks at that point. And eventually our options to, do things ran dry. And I was like, you know what? I definitely want to try out diving in a dry suit and see if it might be for me. And I went there. I went to that dive shop, and we did like a try dive in the lake, and it was amazing. So many fish.
Oh.
The water was cold in my face, but everything else was kind of warm and nice. And that was also where I was introduced to the concept of a backplate and wing, which is amazing. And the dry suit fit me relatively well, and yada yada yada. Long story short, I fell in love with the idea of dry suit diving. So in July 2019, I believe, I actually did my dry suit course here in Zurich. Very dumb decision to do it in like August. And then also listen to, so the person in that shop, she no longer works there, but she was very nice and kind, but also not necessarily getting my hints, because she's like, and it's going to be very, very cold. So like, here's like, put some thermal underwear, and then this layer, and then that layer. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm usually very hot. And it's like 30 something degrees Celsius, which I think is like 60s,
It's pretty warm.
70s in
Yeah.
Fahrenheit. Yeah, it's very warm. And we have like direct sunlight whenever we are outside of the water. And you're in effectively what is a gas tight, dark colored bubble of very quickly warming up air. And I felt like I think I now know how a heat stroke feels. I wasn't having one, but I was very close to one. And like, because it's a course, everyone is like struggling with their gear and like figuring things out. So I was like, guys, whatever you are all doing, I'm just gonna stand in the water for, I don't know, the next 20 minutes, and then we'll work out the rest. And they're like, yeah, but you're not ready. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. The is that I have a heat stroke in like 2 minutes. So bye, see you in a moment. And they're like, okay, whatever you're doing there, just don't die. Thank you. So, and then the dry suit didn't fit, and it was an interesting experience. But luckily, because I did this try dive beforehand with a dry suit that fit me pretty well, and not having the stress of having to do all these exercises, I knew what the experience could be, and I knew that the experience I had during the course was not representative of it, and that's basically what kindled the entire me going diving multiple times a week in Switzerland thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's funny, because what you were saying, that's a trick that they actually use in Mexico. A lot of people, obviously, in the cenotes, they're diving dry, and you'll get suited up and you actually go in the water to cool down for a little bit, because it's so warm, and the water is relatively cool, so you can cool down pretty quickly. And obviously you get out, you come back, gear up, but it cools you down to the point where you have a chance to gear up and you're not basically having a heat stroke. So no, that's so you did the dry suit course, and then at this point, what level of diver were you? Were you still just open water, or when did you start to progress?
I was in advanced open water,
Okay.
because pretty much the earliest opportunity. No, that's right. I wasn't. Yes, now that you say that, I wasn't. Yeah, you're right. I was an open water diver. I was an open water diver. I did a few dives in the Seychelles after my certification, and then pretty much the try dives, and then I went for the dry suit diver. Then afterwards, half a year later, I went for my advanced open water course, and then I just kept diving. And because 2020, the pandemic hit, and I had a buddy who was just certified as an open water diver plus dry suit, and we were bound to do nothing social. The only thing that was somewhat not frowned upon was to kind of like do sports activities with close friends. So the friend of mine and I went diving in all the local lakes basically together while we were on lockdown. And it was a bizarre time, because you had to we didn't have all our equipment yet, so we rented tanks and weights. And the way that they did it, because they weren't allowed to open the shop, but they were in the shop working stuff, I don't know, we kind of had this like agreement that we would have like it felt like a drug dealing affair, basically. It was like, okay, when are you coming today? We'll be there at 9. Okay, there will be 2 tanks waiting for you each. Okay. And then you just like drive in there, you just very quietly, so that the neighbors don't pick up on it, like you quietly like go out of your car, load the tanks and the weights, and then you fuck off again, and then you bring them back in the evening, and they would take them back in the next morning. And it was bizarre. It was really
funny.
Bizarre, but it also drove me to, so I was advanced open water at that point. It also drove me into the rescue course at the earliest convenience, because diving as a relative beginner with a total beginner in an environment that isn't the easiest to dive in, because we are in altitude environments, we are usually having not the easiest entries and exits from the lakes. There is infrastructure, but it's very rudimentary, and you're pretty much on your own. that taught me a lot about like diving in a buddy team and actually being a buddy team, not like the instant buddy kind of situation that you have during your holiday trips. Because I remember having like a buddy that just fucked off to take a picture, and I'm like, okay. I mean, there's the dive guy. The dive guy looks at me, I look at him. He's like, shrug. I'm like, okay, so this is how diving works. And then if you are literally just you and the other person, and you have, I don't know, an arm's length visibility, you learn to actually dive as a proper buddy team.
Yeah.
Because it kind of is a different environment. So, and then I progressed to rescue diver pretty quickly afterwards. I did a bunch of specialties like navigation, night diving, all this kind of stuff, because pretty much every dive below 25 meters in a Swiss lake is always a night dive, independent of time of day and sunshine. And I did these specialties primarily so that I have like a supervised learning environment. And it was really, really good to do that because I had so many different instructors, and each of them has their own teaching style. And some of them you click with, some of them you don't. Sometimes it's the chemistry, not just the way that they teach or the content that they teach, but sometimes it's the chemistry. And you figure out like, what do you value? What do you care for? What helps you? What doesn't help you? And I think that was a really good decision to have like a variety of teachers and buddies as well throughout the year. And eventually I took the step, I think it was 2021, I became a dive master. And then pretty soon after, a year later, I became a instructor as well.
Oh, okay. You know, I completely agree with that on taking instruction from many different instructors, because that was that's very similar to my path, where almost every instructor was different. I know some people, they'll find an instructor and they kind of go through the whole, a curriculum, basically like open water, advanced, rescue. And I always had different instructors, and I completely agree with that, because you can definitely take really good things from people. Even if you don't click, like you can take good things from them and then go on to another instructor that you might click, and then you take more. And then you have this well-rounded bag going into becoming a dive professional. Like, oh, I remember the thing that they did in this class, I really like that. I can incorporate it in my class. I actually wanted to bring it back just a tad bit. So you said when you did, you said you did the dry suit tri-dive. That's when you got introduced to a backplate and wing. Did you go, when you moved forward, I don't know if you had owned your equipment at this point, but were you basically set on the backplate and wing, or did it take a little bit to get back to it?
It took a little bit.
Okay.
I didn't own my equipment back at the time, but then when I bought my equipment, I just followed the recommendations of the people around me, and I got a regular jacket, I think an Aqualung Axiom or something. And to be honest, it was fine. There was nothing wrong about it. I just realized that it is a lot less flexible than the other thing that I tried, and I tried that one again because we did have it in the rental in the shop, and I was like, "Yep, no, this is what I want." And then I switched relatively early on.
Okay. That's actually really funny. So my first kit was a jacket BCD, and it was an Aqualung Axiom. So that's funny. Because I did the shop that I did my basically I did open water through Dive Guide at a shop in Texas, and they're an SSI shop, also an Aqualung dealer. So, and same thing, I didn't have a lot of money going into it. So basically they had this like program, where like, hey, no interest, you can buy this equipment, just pay it off monthly. Every time, you would come in to rent equipment, you could just rent your own equipment, and then it goes towards the payment of your bill.
Yeah.
So,
and eventually you have paid it off. That's an interesting way of doing
it. It worked out awesome, because I was able to get into my own gear, which enabled me to dive a lot more, because I think that's a huge hindrance.
That's gigantic.
To be able to like, I have my own gear, I might as well go out and use it, as opposed to it's like, okay, I have to go out and rent gear, I have to pay for this, I have to pay for that. But if you have your own gear and it's sitting there staring at you, you're like, I need to go out.
Yeah. It's also just at some point, you're, at least here in Switzerland, you can grow relatively independent of a shop. So if you have to rent, let's say, just tanks and weights, you have to go to the shop, you have to pick it up, you have to ask if they have rental gear available, especially in summer. If there's like lots of courses going on, they might not actually have a tank for you. and then you have to find another shop and rent it from them, blah blah blah. You have to go there, you have to pick it up, then you go to the dive site, and to go there, most of the shops are in the city. So you have to go into the city with a car, and then you have to go out of the city to the actual dive sites, and then you have to either you're okay with, or you have a shop that has a relatively reasonable arrangement, like in this shop that I work for. If you bring it back the next morning, it's fine. But then again, you have to go back into the city with your car to drop off the tank. Uh, all for just like one or two dives tops. And if it's like the weekend and it's the same kind of thing, you just keep going to and from the shop. Eh. But if you have your own, and there's like filling stations that are 24/7 here, so you can fill your tanks 24/7 with nitrox, or even trimix, depending on which station you have a contract with. You pay like a yearly fee. And then it's like, okay, so I pay $200 a year. The more I dive, the cheaper is the individual dive, because I pay the flat fee nonetheless, right?
Yeah.
My tank, and I have it in my car. I just drive to that filling station, which usually most of them are not in the city, they're in the peripherals. So you just go to the suburb wherever your filling station is. Mine is on my way back from most of the dive sites that I dived at, so that's fantastic. So I just go there with my car, I dive, on my way back, I fill my tank up again, come back home, done.
Okay. No, so that they just have filling stations just for scuba, or are they using it for other, like people
No.
just have them in their, it's like an actual shop?
Yeah, so it's either a shop or it's like just some very excited people operating one for you.
Oh, wow. That's pretty awesome.
We have one shop that basically collects filling stations. It's pretty wild.
Okay. All right, man. Well, that's interesting. I haven't heard it done like that before, because usually most of the filling stations where I was at are at the shop. And then there was, your kind of independent people that have their own, they have their own, wow, I can't think of it, compressor in their garage, but they're kind of, and you can get fills from them from time to time, but generally it was like, okay, I'll just go drop it off at the shop or whatnot. Well, I guess my next question I wanted to ask you is, so when we first started chatting, we kind of brought up the conversation of rebreathers. So,
yes.
When and how did you decide to get into a rebreather? I mean, I feel like it's a natural progression, start diving a lot.
Oh boy.
But tell me about your progression into the closed circuit world.
All right. So I found out that I'm really into rust underwater. So wrecks. Yay. And wrecks are usually, at least here, most of the wrecks are either in the deeper parts of recreational diving limits. So let's say like 36 meters to 40 meters. I think that's 100 feet plus. And you naturally have to like go deep to visit them. And you can do that on air, and then you're dumb AF when you do that in your head. You're not like getting much out of the dive. Then you go with nitrox. It's not that much better, but you can do it longer. Great. And then eventually you're like, okay, fine. I need trimix. So I got into technical diving. I got into side mount diving first, and then from side mount diving, it was a slippery slope into technical diving. I did my GUE fundamentals on doubles just because I was like, more tools. The more tools you've got in your toolbox, the better. And doubles is for me just a tool. It's not my tool of preference. I do prefer side mount for many of the things that I do. I do see use cases where doubles are probably, or back mounted doubles are probably a better choice, but for most of the things, how I do them, side mount has been fantastic. So I did an open circuit side mount course.
Oh, okay.
That was very expensive and very, very wild. I was like, okay, there is a beautiful, there's a dive site that has a beautiful, gigantic tree that fell into a lake. It sits at 45 meters, so it's slightly outside of the range of recreational divers. You can go 40 meters and just look down on it, fine. But if you want to spend a little more time there and you actually want to like take pictures or videos of it or whatever, you definitely do want to be on some sort of helium mixture. And a friend of mine, he switched to rebreathers a little earlier. He got a Revo certification and his own Revo, because he was like, okay, so I'm not going to do side mount or back mount doubles. I want to go into technical diving. For him, it was a very clear progression. He eventually wants to do technical diving. And he said, and helium is so expensive, and I'm just going to skip these intermediate steps and just go full on rebreather. I'm going to cry once and then be done with it. And I'm like, okay, that's that's one way to do it. Fine, whatever. But once he got his rebreather and his helium mix certifications, he started going with trimix in shallower depth as well. So 30 meters, 35 meters plus. He was usually on trimix as well. And I was like, but holy shit, this is expensive. And he's like, no, it costs me like 8 francs a dive. I was like, excuse me? Because it costs 80 francs a dive. And he's like, yeah, but and eventually we started diving together to the slightly deeper things. And then he's like, okay, let's go visit this tree. And there's like a geocache and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And he's like, okay, so which gas are you taking? I'm like, well, air. He's like, are you sure you want to go on air to that depth? Because, it's not going to be. I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, but, trimix would be a better choice. I'm like, I 100% wholeheartedly agree. It is the better choice. But this tree is beautiful. It's just not 80 francs beautiful. And he's like, well, you see, I don't have that problem. I'm like, good for you. Godspeed. Yes, it is 8 francs beautiful. It's not 80 francs beautiful. So do you. And I hated that he was right about it. Like it was the obviously better choice to go with trimix to these depths. And there were more dives we would do in these depths. And I was like, you're right. It's just, So I eventually set out to find the right rebreather for me. And that was a journey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I could imagine. So, and I've talked about this through the, just various conversations with people on the podcast. But so I just last year I completed my advanced nitrox decompression procedures, kind of moving into that technical world. And, the next, and this is kind of a hard thing for me to say now, but like, I feel like in the past, and some people still might think this or believe in this, the natural progression would be to go from advanced nitrox deco procedures into some sort of open circuit trimix. And that's the route that I was like, okay, I'm going to go. But after speaking to a few different people, they basically were kind of like, well, open circuit, mixed gas is kind of, with the costs of helium, it's like, if you're going to be doing it a lot, you might as well just get into a rebreather now, because in the long run, it's going to save you money. And my instructor actually even posed a really good question to me. He's like, I challenge you to go and speak to people that did their open circuit trimix and ask them when was the last time they did an open circuit trimix dive. And he's like, he obviously didn't say I guarantee you, but he's like, I'll put a lot of money on it that the majority is gonna be like, oh, the last time I did it was in my class, and so that's why I was like, okay, that kind of opened up the rebreather conversations. And it is a tough choice, man. And so I'm curious to hear how you ended up choosing which unit that you have, and then how you ended up gravitating towards it. Because same with me, I've done a fundies class. I can do the back mount doubles. It is a tool, not my tool of choice if I have a choice.
You're also a side mount diver, no?
Yes. And generally, if I can dive side mount, and if I'm, I did my ANDP in side mount, most of my dives, I'm about to head to Mexico later this year. I'm doing cave and side mount. To me, it's just, it's, I know, I hate to say it's easier, because it's obviously not. Like the back mount doubles is very simple, but once you get dialed in, and it's always a work in progress, obviously, but once you get dialed in, I love it. Like, I absolutely love it. It's my preferred weapon of choice, tool of choice. So obviously we kind of were chatting about this. That was another thing, is there's a lot of talk out there, like, don't start on a side mount unit, start on a back mount unit. And then my whole thing was, well, whatever unit you start on, there's going to be a learning curve. So why not just kind of go towards the one, the end in mind type situation, So which
I'm with you on that.
Which unit, and how did you choose?
Okay. So I ended up with the Liberty.
Okay.
Divesoft Liberty.
Side mount or?
That's a funny one. Currently back mount.
Okay.
But I am looking at converting it to a side mount as well, because talking about tools for the job, right? So it has, it has been a bananas journey. And the most frustrating thing ever, because every single rebreather diver that you're talking to, you want to hear the goods and bads. Because I learned very early in life, there is nothing that is just great. Everything has a downside. The question is, how much does this downside matter to you? What might be an absolute like deal breaker for one person might be absolutely fine for the next, and we are seeing that in recreational diving as well, right? Like a cheap kind of plasticky travel regulator might be perfectly fine for someone who basically just backpacks through warm water countries and just wants to jump into the water to look at fish at 10 meters every now and then. Great. However, if you want to do ice diving into a mine in Finland, then maybe this regulator isn't going to cover that use case. If that is what you will be predominantly diving, that is a huge drawback towards the lightweight travel regulator. But the weight of a regulator that might withstand these temperatures is a deal-breaking drawback for someone who's backpacking.
Yeah.
So there is no one size fits all, really. And if we are very honest, similar to, I use regulators as this analogy a lot because they are also the ones, that's the piece of equipment that keeps you alive and gives you air, such as a rebreather does. If we are being very honest, every regulator works on a fundamental level.
Yeah.
You inhale, it gives you air, you exhale, fine, move on, carry on. Every rebreather on the market, I would argue, does that.
Yeah.
Every rebreather will keep you alive to some degree if you use it correctly and if you don't do stupid shit. Fundamentally, that's it.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, because they are complex systems, and as a software engineer, I know this, you have to make decisions along a project, right? The further you progress in your project, the more decisions you have to make.
Unfortunately.
And that means that, unfortunately, exactly. Deciding for something means deciding against something else. And a rebreather is a sufficiently complex machine that there are a lot of decisions that you have to make as a rebreather designer. And that means that you are choosing or preferring something over something else. And then the question is, if you had to make the same decisions, would you make the same choices? And or similar choices? And then you want to find the one that has been designed with kind of your choices in mind. The problem is when you start out with rebreather diving, you have zero idea what these choices and decisions are. And obviously, everyone you ask says, oh, yeah, of course you need a bailout valve. No one dives a DSV anymore. And then you ask the next person, they're like, bailout valve? Oh, my God. No, absolutely not. That thing is going to kill you. And you have no idea. You don't even 5 minutes ago, you didn't know the difference, or there was a DSV versus BOV decision to make. It's like, okay, I just learned about this and now I feel stupid because you make it very obvious that this thing kills me. And then I ask the next person and they say the exact opposite. And both of them are very likely to not be able to explain this. And this is what really, really drives me bananas. That I'm fine. Whatever you choose, you choose. You had your reasons. But at least allow the opportunity for people to say, I chose differently, comma, because. If whatever follows that word because is crazy, fine, disregard it. Or if it is valuable and useful and might not be what you would choose or your reasoning for something or against something, fine, go talk to more people. But I think someone on this podcast also said, like, yeah, no one wants to admit that they spend $10,000 on something that isn't the best, and that is really, really sad to me, because I don't want to sell you my unit. I'm not an instructor, trainer, or an instructor or whatever. I get no commission. If this is the right unit for you? I don't know. It depends on what you value. And I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what are the things that I value and what are the things that I care for, and how would I decide in these situations, and what would I go for or against, and what would I value how much. And then I had to navigate that. And the way that I did that is I read a lot of books, and like the rebreather diving book from Jill Heinerth, for instance, is fantastic. I spoke to a bunch of instructors. And I spoke to them, and I just got the information, and I did not care for for their judgment call in the end. It's like, yeah, I would always go with blah. I'm like, okay, cool, you do you. Why? And then they would have their reasons, and I'm like, okay, I'm jotting these down, and then I'll see if I can actually see factual basis in what I'm seeing from other people, and also what I'm seeing in the specs and in the articles and in the design and yada yada yada. And I spoke to like a bunch of people, probably like 2 or 3 dozen people, until I actually figured out so for me, I want a unit that can be used. I want flexibility. It's my number one goal, flexibility. I want a unit that can be used in a travel capacity. I want a unit that I can use here in cold water, where weight is a secondary concern because it's in my car. It doesn't matter. I don't have to fly with it. And also, I have to put weights on anyway because I have thick undergarments and a dry suit, and it's cold water. And you want the weights. So if you have the weights around your waist or on your back or in the rebreather unit next to you, doesn't matter that much. I also want a unit that actually can potentially work as a side mount unit because I want to take it into the caves as well with me. And so having that already ruled out a bunch of rebreathers because very few can actually be converted between side mount and back mount. A few of them can, some better, some less well, let's put it that way. So that ruled out like a bunch of devices already. And I ended up trying 3 devices. One I tried before, actually 4 devices, if you count the Horizon, but that was just because it was an option to try it out and I just was curious and no. It's too expensive. The problem is it costs like 4K or 3.5K, and then training brings it up to like 5K in total. And you have have a unit that is limited to 40 meters, and it's a semi-closed rebreather. And I'm like, yeah, but if I invest 4 or 5K, I might invest a little more. I think you can get a good condition used Revo or JJ for like 6-7K, and then plus training.
Yeah.
So it wasn't worth it. But I tried the Liberty, I tried the SF2, and I tried the T-Rep. The T-Rep is a weird one because it doesn't fit my criteria. But I tried it before I established that criteria. It's a pure side mount rebreather. You can't convert it into anything else. It's a pure side mount rebreather. And that's why I didn't follow up on that at all. I just dived it and was like, yeah, that's okay. And then I was like, yeah, but it doesn't fit the criteria that I just established now that I know more of what I want to do, more of where my journey needs to lead. So that one's out too. I know the XCCR can be converted and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but all of them had some quirks and weirdnesses where I was like, no, that doesn't quite fit the bill. And the Liberty ended up fitting the bill. And then once I established that, I was like, and now I have to find the right instructor for me. And that again boiled down to me talking to a lot of people, meeting them, checking out how we would click, because what's the point in having an instructor or figuring out your unit and then having troubles getting the instructor right? Because that is a huge factor.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And so the Liberty is actually one that I was looking at quite a bit too. And the seeking out and speaking to people, I don't think it's so much of a secret, but like if you've kind of noticed, depending on who I'm speaking to on the podcast, it's been kind of a common theme. Like, tell me about this rebreather. Tell me about why you chose it. Kind of why you gravitated towards that. What are your positives? What are your negatives? And no, I completely agree with you on what you're saying and it took me kind of a while to figure out, well, what do I want in a rebreather? What are my end goals? Where do I want to go? Yep. And that's another huge thing too, is like, well, where am I going to be? Generally, most of my diving is going to be based in Southeast Asia. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling. So it needs to be a travel friendly rebreather. The side mount ones really appealed to me just because of the fact that they're certain side mount units. Some are, most of them are, I want to say. Even the Liberty side mount is fairly travel friendly. You take it apart, bring the head on the plane. You bring everything on the plane, but into the cabin. So that's why I was starting to look towards side mount. I'm just like, man, I really enjoy side mount diving. But then you start to hear a lot of stuff like, oh, don't start on a side mount rebreather. It's not the way to go. And
That's an interesting one.
it is. Well, the thing too,
I have opinions on that.
I am very, very much wanting to hear them. But the crazy thing is like you were saying, everyone's going to have an opinion on their unit. Most people, yeah, if they just spent $10,000 on a unit, they're not going to be like, yeah, this thing sucks. They're going to tell you, this thing is the savior of the people. So it's kind of hard to gravitate, especially as divers. Most people are very passionate in what they do. So when they tell you something is great, it's not just great. This is the gift.
It's the best.
Yeah, it's the most amazing thing. And if they don't like it, I mean, just hop on scuba board for 30 minutes and you can tell that when people don't like something, they're very vocal about it. So it's like, where do I go? And especially as a, newer person coming into this side of it, it's like, well, who do I speak to? And it kind of got to a point where I'm like, okay, I've spoken to a lot of people. Let me speak to the select little group of people that I really trust and make decisions based on that, utilizing my own decisions on like what I'm looking for. So before I go further into that, tell me about your, real quick, the Jill Heinerth rebreather book, literally sitting on my nightstand. I kind of popped through it. I was able to borrow it. So I'm in the middle of like 8 different reading. Yeah, just not magazines, but like a bunch of stuff I'm reading through right now. But where do you side on starting or not starting on a side mount unit?
I side on the it depends side. I make my own third side. I'm the coin standing up after
option
the coin toss.
C.
Option C, exactly. None of the above. It's an interesting one. So I read an article from Jill Heinerth where she explained also like, oh no, don't start on the side mount, and she only very superficially mentioned a few reasons, and I didn't quite grasp why that was such a big deal. And so I wrote her an email expecting to never hear back. And within a couple of hours, I got a response, and she elaborated. And it was really, really insightful and was really good. So, oh my God, what did she say? So I think there were like 3 or 4 reasons that she mentioned. Let me actually find the email real quick because...
was one of them flood tolerance? I feel like generally that's always one.
That was definitely one. I can't find the email right now. But anyway, so she said, and again, she's right with all of these things. It's just a question, how much does that apply to you?
Yeah.
Number one, she said flood tolerance was definitely a thing. And she said, well, if you think about it, if you are horizontal in the water, and that is true, particularly, I don't know for all of them, but at least for the Liberty side mount, that is absolutely true. Your breathing hoses go down and then into the counterlung. The counterlung does not really have a water trap, and then they go straight into the canister, pretty much through the head into the canister. So if water makes its way in, it will go where gravity takes it down, and it will go into the unit. Even if that doesn't cause caustic cocktail right away, it will definitely do something to the sensors, and then you have like a lot of hassle afterwards. That's for sure. That's just what's going to happen. Versus the back mount unit, where the water would have to flow upwards into your front mounted counterlungs and then upwards back onto the unit on your back. Can happen. It's just less likely, and it takes a little longer for that to actually become a problem. So if you really have the loop open, dangling around your neck while you're standing on the surface, probably a big problem. If you just, I don't know, have some water enter the loop, it's a very minuscule issue. Fine. The other thing she said was work of breathing. And I know she's right about that. However, having dived other side mount rebreathers than the Liberty in side mount, if trimmed out correctly, and I'm sorry if you are a side mount diver who has trouble trimming out your tanks, side mount rebreather might not be the step for you yet. I stand by that statement. You should have your trim and your buoyancy under control when you want to start side mount diving in a rebreather or with a rebreather. You don't have to if you have like a system like the Sidewinder or the Gemini, which are like split back mount things. I think they're more tolerant to that. But if you do like a true side mount rebreather, I think that makes a huge difference. And also the design of the rebreather then makes a huge difference. The SF2 dives very and feels very, very different from a work of breathing perspective than the Liberty does. But the Liberty feels really good, unless you do things like head down through a cave or something like that. And I think if you are starting out with your rebreather, you probably don't want to do that. You should probably, take it easy. Maybe not do that right away. Maybe you want to start a little simpler. I don't know, open water, enjoy yourself first, and then that work of breathing, in my opinion, is not a concern. If it isn't a concern, it usually means that you have issues that you need to correct elsewhere, like your trim or the device's trim is not figured out. And I would argue that is less of an issue than people make it to seem. Like, oh, but the work of breathing. Yeah, no, I do not agree with that. Yes, it is different. No, it's not a big deal, because the work of breathing fundamentally switches no matter what kind of rebreather you're doing or you're choosing. It feels different. You will notice that your position in the water has an effect on your work of breathing. At the beginning, it is weird. You get used to it very quickly. That's part of the course. That argument seems blown out of proportion, at least in my opinion. From what I personally experienced, seems to be blown out of proportion. Then she said something about, well, it's easier to understand the flow of gas and how your unit works if it's a back mount unit. Can't confirm. I have not felt it's more difficult or more complicated. I found the email. Yeah, so they are easy to flood. That was the reason that we already talked about. Work of breathing, we talked about. Yeah, then the gas path. The gas path is easier to visualize on a back mount rebreather. It might be true for some people who are having trouble visualizing what happens around them or having issues with situational awareness to begin with. Then that might exacerbate that. True, because you have like the device is on one side of you, and like pretty much everything happens in the device. And if you haven't studied closely how that works and how the structure is set up, then yes, I can see that being tricky. And with the back mount rebreather, it's very easy. One side, for me, it's air comes in, fresh air comes in from the left side, goes through my mouthpiece, exhale goes to the right, goes into the right side counter lung, goes into the head, goes into the scrubber, blah, blah, blah. Easier to figure out, sure. But if the thing is on my right-hand side, I can still trace the flow of gas through the device. It is not as easy, I agree with that, but honestly, hasn't mattered to me.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a big factor. I can see that it might be a big factor for some people. It's not for me. So you would have to figure out, is that a concern? Because you should know where gas goes to and comes from. You should know how your device works. What's the steps? How are things arranged in terms of gas flow? But I can visualize it in both scenarios.
Okay.
And intuitively do so.
Yeah.
If you can't do it intuitively, if you have to think about it, maybe a back mount might be easier to deal with than for the beginning part. Yes. Yeah. So that's the reasons that she explained to me are a difference in terms of back mount versus side mount. And then she brings up the issue that a lot of people are not having as much experience in side mount as in back mount. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, okay, sure, I can understand that doing your first kind of side mount experience on a rebreather. So you're learning not just the rebreather, but also side mount. Yes, that is going to be, side mount should be second nature to you when you want to start side mount CCR diving, because CCR diving will reset you on your journey. It will make everything be non-natural and non-obvious and non-automatic at first, and you have to regain these muscle memory things again. And if you have no muscle memory for side mount, then dealing with two things at a time, I see that as tricky.
Oh yeah, no, I could definitely agree with that. And one thing I heard before going into my first try dive, because I've tried three different units.
Good.
One thing I've
Very good.
one thing I've heard going
No,
into it.
seriously. A lot of people are like, no, it's a waste of time. No, it's not.
No,
Yeah. You
I'm
heard?
my goal was to try a bunch of different ones.
Mm-hmm.
So my one thing that I did hear going into it was, it's almost like starting over again. Like it's even if you're a very experienced open circuit diver, you're going to get into a rebreather. It's completely different because of,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people and myself included. I'm using my breath a lot, my lung capacity a lot to balance myself out, to get me a little bit more positive, to get me a little bit more negative. And they're like, yeah, that's not an option once you get into a rebreather.
Mm-hmm.
And so it did take me a little bit to kind of get that down. So the first unit I tried was a Revo, and I'll say it was a unit that I was looking at, and I'm still kind of looking into it. If I can get into a cheaper unit, I might I know a few people that teach on them, and I'd like to kind of link up with them a little bit. So to be able to
Mm-hmm.
be on a unit while they're teaching a course, I think would be kind of a great learning experience. And then it can kind of help me move into the instruction path if I eventually ever want to get there. So I tried the back mount unit, really enjoyed it. I did have a hard time kind of trimming out in the Revo, which I've come to find out
Mm-hmm.
afterwards that it is a hard unit to trim out on.
Yeah.
What a lot of people tell me because of where the counter lung is and just how the unit is situated on your
Mm-hmm.
back. So I tried that one, and then I tried a Choptima,
Mm-hmm.
and then I actually tried a Liberty side mount unit. And
Mm-hmm.
I will and I need more time on the Choptima, but between the back mount, the front mount, and the side mount, so I got like a good, nice, well-rounded, like, because it was the Liberty side mount.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed a lot of it. The one that I felt the easiest, obviously, was the Revo, because just throw it on your back, good to go. You're kind of it's more natural. Obviously, I've been diving back mount a lot more than side mount. The front mount Choptima, I did not enjoy as much, but it wasn't dialed in as much as, obviously, we popped it on. It wasn't completely dialed in to where I felt like I could have got more comfortable on it. But just kind of trying these over the course of a few days, I was like, yeah, I don't really like that one. And then the side mount one I really enjoyed because it's basically like your diving side mount. You like literally
Yeah.
you're in a side mount configuration. There's no change. The only thing I think I
Yeah.
could have it could have been positioned a little bit better, because I had asked someone about this the other day, and they said it's not a problem for they didn't really understand what I was. They understood what I was saying, but they're like, that's never happened to me. Is with the counter lung, I felt like as I was going, every time I would breathe in or out, it was out. I would kind of pivot up
Mm-hmm.
on that side because obviously the bag's
Mm-hmm.
inflating a little bit, and I was like, okay, that I'm assuming that's not a normal thing. I need
No,
to,
then it's not well dialed in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, okay, but it just to try those three units. I'm like, okay, like maybe I should go for the Revo because it's a back mount unit, and the Revo is
Travel
one that
friendly.
people either love or they hate. Like they hate it with a passion, and so I was like, okay, I will be honest, my mind was kind of set on a Revo, and then I kind of pulled the trigger on another unit, which I have yet to pick up. I'm flying back to the States, and then I'm going to go get training on it later this year. But just it kind of hit all of the points that I was looking at: side mount, travel friendly. It's very, I don't want to say easy to use, but it's a mechanical. But I basically pulled the trigger, and I'll be getting a Gemini.
Aha.
Yeah, I'll be
Okay.
getting a
Yeah.
Gemini.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
And so it was obviously between those two. It's like, there's the Sidewinder, there's the Gemini, and
Mm-hmm.
I've never used either, obviously, but the Sidewinder was something I was looking at for a while, and I probably would have gravitated towards that, but for some reason there was just kind of reasons why I didn't choose that. Nothing bad, nothing, it's
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But I just ended up deciding to go with the Gemini. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
let you know. But yeah, you're the other than the instructor that I've been speaking to and like two other people, you're the top tier of people to know that. So now everybody that's going to listen to this episode, but by then
Nice.
it'll be a little
Nice.
bit down the line. So
No, I understand that. That's reasonable. No, that makes sense. As you said, like what I find interesting is I haven't met someone who hates the Revo. What do they say? Why do they hate the Revo?
So one, it's hard to trim out. Two, if you need to change the counter lung, it needs to be sent back to the factory because it's basically within a metal grate. So they're saying that it needs to be sent back to the factory. The other one is I'd have to look. Let me see if I could find it.
I'll have to talk to someone about that.
Well, I was told that you can do it yourself, but it's kind of a pain in the ass. So most people will send it back to the factory. Let's see. I'm gonna see if I can find one because I was in a message.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, because obviously some people heard some episodes where I was kind of gravitating towards the Revo. Ended up usually,
and then they come out of the woodworks. Yeah.
It's usually how it goes. Person was like strongly recommending you not buy a Revo. They're not easily field serviceable. Too many cells. Pain in the ass to dive with a wetsuit. They're really foot heavy and they're not flood tolerant. Is a few of the reasons somebody gave me, which I thought that they were somewhat flood tolerant, but I guess it depends on what unit you're diving, right? Like one unit could be absolutely amazing and then the next, but I guess it just depends on what you're going for.
Also depends on how you've been trained and what you know, because I know at least my friend who dives a Revo, he had a few flooding incidents, never was a big problem. Like it was not a big deal. It's not optimal. I give you that because, for instance, the Liberty counterlung has a dump valve. So water gravitates towards the dump valve. I pull the dump valve, I flush, and then I basically just overpressure the loop a little bit, and then it pushes out the water. Problem solved. You can't really do that with the Revo, as far as I'm aware. They don't have a dump valve.
Yeah.
So arguably, yes, it is less flood tolerant, but I don't. It's one of these strongly held opinions.
Yeah, I think too, it depends on what environment, where you're going, what you're doing. And then to be honest, actually, so, and this is like another, I had actually been the same person recommended. They're like, they would basically saying that you should wait until solid state sensors become more of a thing in the industry. At that point, I didn't really know what solid state sensors were, so I started looking into it, and they have been around for a while, but there's only a few units out there that are able to use them because I'm sure of not laws, but ownership. And so I was like, oh, okay, well that would be great, but then when is it going to become more available to the public? Am I going to be waiting 10 years to get into a unit? No, and then all of a sudden at the boot this year, Halcyon drops their which that unit's been around for a little bit, but and then oddly enough, I thought that was kind of funny is Halcyon drops their unit for the rebreather, the chest mount, which I'm kind of curious because they say they have a side mount, a back mount. So I'm kind of curious to know what's going to happen more with that. But if you noticed, I don't know or I noticed, maybe it was just kind of a whatever, but I swear that rebreather dropped, hit the news waves everywhere. And then I swear I just saw like a flood of units for sale on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
So I'm like wondering oh, okay, the big H has just dropped some stuff. So everyone's going to gravitate towards it.
That's the other thing. Like a bunch of people are just like high school cliques and they're like, oh, the new clothes from this brand, we need to buy it. The big H makes a bunch of really good products.
They do.
But a bunch of them are just like overpriced or not as great as they are made to be. I remember boat last year where they were like, look, our wings now come in different colors. And they were like, everyone's like, oh, revolution. And I'm like, I'm sorry, no. It's great. Don't get me wrong. I find that is a great thing because we need more color choice.
Yes.
In my opinion. But it is not the big revolution that they presented it as. It's like, Cool. Thumbs up from me. Good job. Good job. Only like, I don't know,
Uh,
6, 7 years after everyone else.
I don't
Good
know.
job.
It's that is pretty funny. But so we're pretty much wow that this conversation has flown by. So let me throw out a final question before I let you go. And man,
Okay.
this conversation's been great. Like I'm gonna have to have you back on. This has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
So the last question I have for you, advice question, is somebody that kind of like when you first started, and I'm assuming because there's a lot of
Hmm.
people, it happened in Texas, where they want to get into diving, but they might not know about the area that there's a lot of diving, but maybe they kind of start to it opens up to them. What suggestion would you have for that person to if they wanted to get into diving in the cold waters of, I don't want to say the Switzerland, but wherever, yeah, wherever you're at.
Hmm. Definitely hit like the whatever is the local equivalent of scuba board. I know that the German speaking community has taucher.net. So figure out like where are the divers at. And the easiest way to do that probably is to go to Google Maps or Google or whatever search engine you're using and look for local dive shops. Send them an email or figure out when they're open, pop by, and number one, see if the vibe fits. Because divers are as diverse, divers are as diverse as any other community out there. So there will be shops you wander into and you feel like, oh no, this is not my crowd. It's fine to walk away from them, just go somewhere else. If that happens to be the one local dive shop, then maybe this local dive shop isn't your shop and you have to find the one next town over, or like a short ride or a short flight or whatever is the closest to you, but find the one that has the right vibe. Because if you want to get into diving for the passion of it, and I think all of us do, because none of us has to be like, we're not in the military, we don't have to dive because life and death depends on it. So no, seriously, it should be fun.
Yeah.
And if you're like, but that guy is gonna be there, or oh no, I don't like the way they do this, or oh god, I now have to listen to all the comments again because of my yellow fins or something like that, then it's not fun. And if it's not fun, you're not gonna do it much. It costs you money, it costs you time, it costs you effort. Why would I do that with something that doesn't make me happy? And people have the tendency to do that, to not make you happy. And also, it shapes you. Because if you are becoming part of that community while you're not feeling like, oh, yeah, I don't agree with all of the things that they do and how they do things and the general vibe, and they are like making fun of each other and it kind of is hurtful at times or whatever, but I'm sticking around because it's the only shop I've got, and then you become like that. That's
Yeah.
the only thing. Like you either drop out or you become like that. Do you want that? Do you want to be the person who makes the next person feel like you felt when you first entered that shop? No. And luckily, there are so many places and so many people to dive with. Find the one that you feel happy, at peace, and enjoy yourself. Don't try to impress the big cave guy who has been fighting sharks in caves with a knife, blindfolded, downhill in the snow. I don't know. Like, these people exist. They tell you like, oh yeah, I've been to 1,500 meters blindfolded with only 1 liter of air on 2 breaths against the current. It's like, great, good job, congratulations, bless your heart. Like, no, I don't have time for crap like that. I don't want to be around people like that. I want to be around the people who are like, oh yeah, we saw a really nice bunch of fish today. Yeah, that was lovely. Oh, we had a good time. Yeah. And maybe they have tips for you. Maybe they're like, well, you're trim, you could try this, or maybe try that, or maybe, if you want to learn the frog kick, let's go tomorrow and just go in shallow water and try the frog kick together. Nice people who help you, who support you. If they ridicule you for where you are in your journey, screw them. Each of us has started. Each of us looked like crap in the water at some point, and we had the right people around us to help us get where we are today. If they are like, ooh, I'm the hero, you're crap. No. Just say bye-bye to that.
Dude, I fucking love that. That is probably one of my favorite closings right there, dude. No, it's so true though, because and no, I love that the part where it's like you were saying, if you end up sticking around there, then you become them, and that happens far too much, and that sucks because they're just it's that vicious circle that just keeps happening. No, that is such a great piece of advice, and that is the beautiful thing about this community or these communities is there's so many communities out there, and if one doesn't fit or if you're not feeling right in one, get into the next one because there will be a next one. No, I fucking love that, man. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Well, dude,
thanks for having me.
No, man, this has been absolutely amazing. Like, I feel like I need to have you back on because I feel like the conversation we should still be going. So we'll have to pick some different topics, and then you'll have to come back on for sure. But no, I thank you very much, man. I really, really appreciate you coming onto the podcast today.
I appreciate you having me and doing this podcast with all these amazing guests that you had. I'm really, really enjoying the show. Really. Has been a true honor.
Offgassing, a scuba podcast.